Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, Roger shares his story of coming from a family in construction to working at a Big Four in the real estate consulting division. We learn what motivated him to pursue accounting and finance in college, what he did when he realized he was behind his peers with no sophomore internship, and how he made the transition from audit successfully. Enjoy. All right, Roger, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Patrick.
It'd be awesome if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Sure. Grew up in Southern California and kind of bounced around between Orange County and Los Angeles. Eventually, after high school, found my way back up to Los Angeles and attended the University of Southern California with an emphasis really on accounting and real estate finance. Ultimately graduated, tried to graduate on time, so left there with a 4-year degree in accounting and went to go start work at a Big Four accounting firm as an auditor. During the recruiting process, really had looked into and tried to get an opportunity with a lot of the transaction real estate groups that at that time were just forming and kind of starting their businesses and their operating models. At that time, and this was kind of pre the 2008-9 crash, they were really looking for graduate students. So you needed some sort of real estate master's or a real estate and finance master's degree. And I was coming out of undergrad and really didn't have that degree. So was told to either take another lap and go get an additional degree or go get some work experience and come back and try to apply. And so that's the route that I ultimately took. I went through and completed about 3 years as an auditor, making my way through various engagements and tried to focus primarily on financial services and real estate. And about 2.5 years in, I had an opportunity to go take some real estate focused finance trainings that the firm was offering.
Cool.
Go ahead.
I said, cool. That's awesome. So you took advantage.
Yeah, I took advantage of some of the internal networking opportunities and trainings and made it known that I had tried to apply about 3 years earlier for the same position that was still something I was looking into and interested in joining, and eventually had an opportunity to interview with some of the individuals that were in that group in my local office. And a couple months later, had the opportunity to get an offer and get a transfer over to the real estate consulting side or transaction consulting side from the audit side. Very
cool. All right, let's start all the way back. And then you've been there for a long stint, almost the longest I've seen coming right out of school. It's been over a decade. Let's give the listeners an idea. So you clearly love where you're at, which is awesome. So let's go back to just undergrad though. I want to get a little bit more of a background in terms of, why accounting and why finance, and USC is great. Did you grow up in like Irvine area? My wife's from there.
Just south of there, Mission Viejo area.
Yeah, cool. And so you kind of ended up at USC, but were you always drawn to finance and accounting? Were your parents like, what did your parents do?
Yeah, not originally. I would say my father was in construction, was in law enforcement prior to that. My older brother ended up going to USC as well, and did ultimately find himself at a construction company. I was looking to be more of an individual behind the numbers, maybe not as much wanting to be out in the field. Got that exposure earlier on in kind of my younger years growing up. And I think the point was my dad really wanted to make sure that I didn't think working a field job was a great idea. So I got that opportunity before I was, able to really go out and work on my own. And he was right.
Did he make you work on some projects? Get your hands
dirty? I worked on some projects. I did pickup work, growing up 10, 12, 15 years old, and spent enough time swinging a hammer that knew I didn't want to do that for the next 50 years of my life.
Very good. So when you got to USC, was there an internship? Was there some sort of groups or anybody like a mentor that had kind of gone down that path that said, you should focus on this? Or you just felt you were good at it?
it was one of those things, right? I think I took my first accounting classes, and midway through, I had all these classmates asking for help or asking me how I understood things so quickly. So it was just maybe somewhat of a natural gift that I picked up the content very quickly and was able to apply it. And so any of the scenario based, modules or anything that we went through in class were kind of second nature to me.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, probably sophomore year, I figured out, well, maybe this is something I really got to take seriously, because my first year going into college, I was actually pre-med, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then I very quickly figured out that that probably wasn't where I was supposed to be. So I left, went
You
general.
did much better in accounting than you did in biology, is what you were telling me.
That's right. Yeah, I think it's a safe way to put it.
So okay, so you're kind of going through, did you do anything your freshman summer, sophomore summer? When did you get any internships? How did that kind of progress through your
No,
undergrad?
I actually was a late bloomer, so I was pretty active in sports, and so sports was not at the college level, or not for the school, but was pretty active in both working, I would say, and playing sports. So
What did you like to play?
so I actually raced motorcycles. So I did that for
Oh,
a good
cool.
while, and then had an accident my sophomore year, which I think led me to resetting kind of priorities and objectives and where life was taking me. And I think that's when
What did you break on the accident? Nothing.
so
Everything.
lower back,
Oh,
yeah, so L3 through 5, and after that you reset your priorities and you figure out that you're not Iron Man, you're not invincible. And so I started really getting serious about school, and taking it from there, and running with it, and was able to get my grades up, and get into business school, and really, I think make a successful career at school in the short term, which ultimately led to some good recruiting efforts and some good responses from recruiters. And
how did you just start just applying to the big four like junior year for internships? Tell me how that worked out, that whole recruiting. If you remember, like how many places you applied, the conversion rates, all that good stuff, if you remember.
yeah, so I remember. So yeah, I mean, at first it probably wasn't until my junior year, probably like literally showing back up on campus August, September of my junior year, that I really figured out that I had to take it seriously. I think coming back, to school and hearing about all these, students or classmates of mine that had sophomore internships, which, to be honest, I was rather oblivious about. I think at the time I was kind of surprised that they'd already had some decent internship experience. So, made it a point to get my name out there and try to meet as many people as I could. And
So at this point, your resume is like a blank slate.
like nothing, like it's
Yeah.
got a couple jobs up, out there, but it's like, swinging a hammer was one of them. Right. So not great, directly, corresponding experience to the positions or the jobs I was seeking.
Hmm.
That's kind of amazing. I mean, now I look at the number of resumes that come across my desk, and I just thank God that I, went down that path a decade or a decade and a half ago, because some of the resumes I see come across my desk are fairly substantial and amazing, and would have definitely, outpaced me by a fair margin.
Fair. Okay. So you're coming in your junior year, you kind of realize, oh, like all these other people had sophomore internships. So you start actually sounds like getting more aggressive with the networking and that whole spiel. What did you do? Was LinkedIn wasn't even around, or it was just starting out then? So
LinkedIn, LinkedIn was just coming out,
yep.
so LinkedIn was definitely a thing. I don't think it was definitely not obviously as widely used as it was today. I mean,
It's like
even
this is '06, right? This is like
yeah,
around.
06, 07. Yeah, yeah. No, I guess yeah, maybe 05, 06, 07, so
Mhm.
somewhere in that range. So Facebook, is just now starting up, and a thing. And LinkedIn, it was like, how many of these things do you want to join? MySpace was the prior, generation of the whole social media platform that was popular in the day. And so I wasn't really, I would say, all that active on LinkedIn. I think I set up a profile, as a student, but for the most part, it was on campus activity. So getting involved with, for me, definitely, the accounting groups, the finance groups, the investment banking groups, the real estate investment groups.
So were you talking to like any professionals during this whole thing, or you're just getting info from like other students trying to be like, hey, you need to apply here, or was like the on-campus recruiting the route you went and just went straight in?
Yeah, it was kind of all of it. So trying to digest as much as I could. I had that sense of urgency because I knew I was in a way, in some respects, behind some of my peers. And being, ultra competitive, I didn't want to be behind or didn't want to be in that position for long. Didn't like that feeling. So I tried to go attend as many events and soak up and learn as much as I could as quickly as possible. Definitely went out and, got the school business cards that I kind of look back and kind of chuckle at, but I still get those from time to time. The business cards that say what your degree is going to be in and your name and that you're actually a student at the school.
Do you chuckle now? Do you recommend kids do that if they like get their own business cards? Maybe I know on Wall Street Oasis there's probably been a couple threads making fun of kids who do that. Do you recommend it, or do you think it's a good thing or a negative thing?
Yeah, because I would say it's a good thing, and here's why. You could laugh at it, and maybe it's depending on what day, you may chuckle more or less at the fact that someone could view it as being very serious. But as a recruiter now, I do like receiving them because sometimes I'll get a card and I'll make a note on the back of the card. Oh, this was the guy that grew up racing karts, or this was the girl that rode horses from the age of 3 and is a phenomenal, like, just so I can kind of remember who that individual is. So not having something like that and not being maybe at an organized event, it does make it hard to remember. If someone's not giving you a resume, not giving you a card, not leaving something behind.
But
If I
wouldn't you suggest like they get the card from the professional and then they follow up over email? Isn't that a more traditional way? Or is
uh,
like it's or does the card allow you to get that card back almost?
it depends who's chasing who at that point. So if they're, I definitely appreciate when individuals will ask for my contact information or card, and follow up with an email. And sometimes, I think one of the things I'd suggest is if you have an interesting conversation with someone, make mention of it or make a joke, make light of it, so that you kind of jog their memory about what that conversation was about, or what you covered during that time. A lot of times, as a professional from a recruiting standpoint, you may meet 100 different students in an evening. So you want to be able to stand out as one of those students that is memorable, hopefully in a good way. On the opposite side of the spectrum, if you do something to kind of shoot yourself in the foot and you're remembered for that, just remember that does kind of stick with you, I think, for a while, because we'll go back the next week as a firm or as a group and talk about the different candidates. And it never fails that someone made some awesome first impression that, gets them kind of excluded from the resume drop, or their resume doesn't go very far in the process.
Do you have
So
examples of like what some kids have done that has just gotten them basically blackballed for for the
yeah,
recruit?
yeah, no, of course I do. Yeah. So, I've got a number of those. So I would say, simple things though, mind your manners. If you are not comfortable, regarding business etiquette or etiquette during meals, there are so many resources out there. I mean, let's be honest, you can learn anything from YouTube, or pretty much anything in a Google search you can learn. So you really have no excuse.
Are you telling me people are ordering spaghetti and shoving it down their face and like eating with their mouth open? Is that what you're talking about? Or like
I mean, yeah,
ordering
see,
the lobster and spraying it everywhere?
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, maybe, when learning proper etiquette when passing a dish or asking for a dish and not touching other people's food with your hands. That's that I do remember, that I think me and one of the partners I was with, we kind of looked at each other and were like, is this seriously happening right now? Like, it was kind of comical. But and then I would say the other thing is, approach all your
Someone
conversations.
was touching your food on your plate?
No, it wasn't me. It was two different students, and the one student was touching the other student's food, and it was just awkward and kind of a strange situation. But they act like it was completely normal. I'm like, yeah, that's probably not. And
Interesting.
and I'll never forget that partner made it very clear that that was unacceptable to me afterwards, and that was basically a deal killer right then and there. That we could not have that. We could not possibly have someone use that judgment in front of a client, and somehow make their way in front of one of our clients eventually.
Yeah, fair. Okay. Anything else you remember? I think the stories are always fun. Like
Let's
people
see.
cutting other people off. Like I'm cutting you off a lot here.
No, yeah, so I think it's honestly just being empathetic to your surroundings. So, this day and age, there's a bunch of different, you know, there's a bunch of different ways that you can offend people, whether that's politically, race, gender, sexual orientation, you name it. Just being empathetic that not everyone around you is going to think or believe the same way you do. And if you hear something that perhaps is inconsistent with your beliefs or your foundation, being able to accept that, at least hear someone out and not show direct disdain or sarcasm towards somebody, because it really does no one any good. One, you make the individual that's trying to voice their opinion, you make them feel uncomfortable. And then a lot of times you create an uncomfortable situation for everyone there that's listening. And so someone that can't play well with others, to say it kind of lightly,
Hmm.
is not someone that I think is generally real successful in recruiting for a lot of the larger firms that have a reputation and a standard to uphold.
For sure. For sure. Really interesting. Okay. So you're basically coming in through junior year, you're going to all these events, but what does it result in? Like what actually comes out of that stuff? Is it did you actually land an internship for junior summer?
Yeah, so I landed an internship, and along the way, I would say, kind of being competitive and having friends that were competitive as well. A lot of
Were you guys talking a lot of shit to each other? Be honest. Like, oh, you're not gonna get anything, or were you like that kind of competitive, like openly fun competitive, or
No, it was just it was honestly it was kind of racking up offers. How many offers do you rack up? How many interviews did you rack up? How well did you do in the interviews? How soon did you hear back? And I would say I probably, wasn't one to be bragging. I mean, I wasn't, you know, I wasn't one that was racking up dozens and dozens of interviews, but the interviews that I did get, the half a dozen or so, maybe closer to a dozen interviews ultimately that honestly resulted in this, level one or a phase one, phase two interview and
hmm.
office visits or, invites, out to dinner or what have you. Um, a lot of those interviews, I just took them very seriously. So I had friends that had so many interviews that they kind of didn't, they're like, I can't prepare for all of them. So I'm just going to kind of wing it. And honestly, I think when you do that, it's probably best to not do that if you're not seriously considering working for a particular firm or company. So oftentimes you may be taking away a spot from someone who is seriously considering working for the firm and they didn't even get the opportunity because let's say it's someone that is set for big four, they're definitely going big four, but they rack up 10 interviews with regional and national firms. Well, if they know that they've never accepted a position and they are going to get an offer from a couple of the big four firms and that's the direction they're headed, they just stole an interview spot from a few of their classmates that might not have the grades or the pedigree to go big four, but really wanted that opportunity with a regional or national firm and then didn't even get the shot. And
Hmm.
so where are they now? So I would say be mindful and put your efforts into,
That's an
who
interesting point. I mean, part of what I often preach is just to take every interview you can get, just because the reps are so critical. So, like from the other side of the coin, oftentimes I'm like, you take every single interview you could ever get on, and but you treat it seriously. And you try to learn about the firm because sometimes you're surprised. Sometimes you think you know a company and you think there's no. I mean, yeah, if there's no way, I agree with you. But
yeah.
if there's a chance, I think turning that interview down and doing like a mock interview like this with somebody's very different, man, than the real thing.
I agree with you too. So if you have the ability, the availability, the ability and the time to take them all
Yeah,
seriously, do it, without a
yeah,
doubt, especially kind of earlier on in your career. But if
yeah.
you've already talked to a lot of the firms, I mean, I figured out pretty quick that there was a firm or two in the big four where I really wasn't all that interested. So one of them, I did actually withdraw my application after an event. I just, look, this probably isn't the right place for me. Don't
Do
burn
you
bridges.
do you think you would have done that in 2009 if it wasn't 2006?
Great
When
question.
when
I
yields when yields are offers are very hard to come by and stuff like that. I mean, I think maybe it was part of the time. Like you knew you were going to get an offer, maybe, or you had that confidence. Maybe it's just personality. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it depends on everyone's individual situation. Yeah, I mean, if you're worried about not landing an offer ultimately,
Right.
you don't want to, look back and hindsight's always 2020, but you don't want to look back at your situation and be like, well, I told three firms that I wasn't interested in the six I was interested in all the, declined the offer.
Yeah.
So if you're in that situation, you probably don't feel real great about your prior decisions.
Yeah. I say oftentimes, at least from my perspective, when I was in college, there's a lot of overconfidence, especially if you've done well in school, you're at a good school, your GPA is pretty, you're thinking, oh, I got all these interviews. I mean, I had like 12 first round interviews. I only landed one offer. So like, I mean, it was in a bad time. It was '02, right after everything went down. So it explains some of it, but had several final rounds. So I would just encourage people not to be um, too picky early and to keep your net pretty broad and just explore, at least in the informational interview, especially in the informational interview portion of it, because man, that's something you don't want to be overly confident in. The economy turns south or something like COVID happens, and then you're stuck on the outside looking in with no job, moving back in with the parents. So anyway, so you're
Yeah, it's very true.
so okay, so let's go back to the story. So you kind of had it sounds like half a dozen first rounds, and then you kind of progressed on several second rounds. You're doing well. Um, Tell me how that worked. Like, did you know you were going to do audit? Or was that what you did in the summer?
Yeah, so that's what I did during the summer. I don't know.
Why are you smiling? Why are you laughing right now? You seem like you're
That's
kind of
I
smiling.
think that's when I maybe figured out that audit wasn't what I was going to do for 30 years. So I think it hit me there probably during my internship that, you know, I can do audit. I think it's a great start. I think you learn a ton of skills. You learn a ton about business in general. You pay your dues, but you get a lot out of it. And I think you mature a lot. You develop some technical skills.
But you knew in your internship that wasn't something you were going to do for 30 years, yet you still did 3 years in that group
Yeah.
because
So go ahead.
because it was at a good firm. It was something you felt like it was the right place to be, or were there other reasons?
Yeah. It's a combination of things again.
Well,
I
I know
mean,
financial crisis right during the middle of it.
yeah, that's right. So, yeah. And so, having been kind of inside of a rather large bank's office, kind of the day that a lot of the collapse occurred and kind of the weeks and months that followed was pretty eye opening. You see 50 people on a floor at a time getting laid off and not showing back up on, after leaving on Friday and the next Monday they're staying at home, and seeing that kind of happen week in and week out. I think that got real pretty quick. So it was one of those things where I think a lot of us went into survival mode because I think all of the big four firms had layoffs at my level and at the junior levels. There just wasn't a need for as many, staff accountants or staff auditors, or, even going up through some of the junior, supervisory levels, senior audit assistant or in charge and some of the other positions that are
I
held. Or,
I would assume audit probably weathered the storm better than most groups, though. Is that accurate? Because
uh,
like there's still auditing. I mean, I'm sure there were cuts, but people still need to get their audit done, right?
I would say yes,
Or
but we're going with skeleton crews. So I remember
yeah,
some of the audits that I was on previously where we had maybe just a team of five and we went down to two. One of them ultimately we went down to just myself, and so I'm
wow.
working by myself, which used to be a team of 4 or 5. And you know you you have to fill a pretty big set of shoes when you're a first or second year, and all of a sudden your experienced seniors and even your managers get let go. I mean, you still had the responsibility to help make sure that audit got through to completion.
Were you stressed out about that? Did you feel like you might lose your job at some point?
I think I probably back then was a little stressed out about it, but I've always been fairly confident in like my ability to go find a job somewhere. Maybe it's not even doing the same thing, but pick myself up off the ground and go find a dollar.
It's fair.
Doing something kind of moving forward.
You could always swing the hammer.
Right.
So okay, so you kind of weather that storm. It sounds like, and as you're coming out of it, as things are stabilizing a little bit, although still pretty rickety, you kind of make that transition internally to the real estate side. Can you talk a little bit about, just for the listeners that aren't familiar, what like a real estate consulting position looks like? What are you actually doing? Who are your clients? What's the type of analysis day to day?
Yeah, so it's honestly it's quite broad. So if you look at what we do as part of a big four firm, frankly, if I'm honest, and I know fairly well the other counterparts, in other big four firms, none of us are very large in terms of the overall scale of the firm nationally or at least globally. If you look at the tens of
You mean specifically the real estate groups?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. If you look at the tens of thousands of people that each of the firms employs across, the accounting and the tax and the consulting sides, especially if you go so far as to look at, the individuals that specialize in implementations and internal systems, the real estate side of the house is very, very niche and very, very small in terms of overall headcount.
Like
So
120, 300, what's small? 10?
yeah, so yeah, call it, somewhere, around 100 plus or minus 50. And I think most of the
Okay.
big firms now,
Okay.
where a lot of their total professional counts are above 50,000, probably somewhere south of 100, but
Mhm.
definitely, many, many multiples of what the real estate group would ever hope to be.
Got it. So yeah, so day to day, like what types of engagements are typical for, like, who are your clients, I guess?
So I'd say most of our clients, range from anything from, family offices all the way up into the global, 100. A lot of the Fortune 500 companies have massive real estate holdings. They may not be in the business of real estate, but they either use, own, or operate real estate as a key portion of their business.
Hmm.
If you really look at any P&L statement, of these large firms kind of across the globe, and it really is something that I would say does blanket the globe. It's not specific to the US or to Europe or Asia, but all of these companies that have large operations, they are going to be users of real estate in some, shape or form, whether that's leasing massive amounts of real estate, or they own it. And a lot of times, since that's not their primary core business, they don't have a real robust or as robust as they might need real estate, group, something like just a corporate real estate group that can manage and do all the things that are involved in operating a portfolio of that size. So we come in and really help a lot of our clients through that. So whether it's diligence on the front end of a transaction, and it can be a diligence activity specific for the acquisition or development of real estate, or it can be, in conjunction with the acquisition of a business, and they're now acquiring either owned real estate that is currently owned by the target company, or maybe perhaps they're going to be stepping into a large sum of leases. And so they need to figure out really what is the liability there, what are they stepping into, and how do they digest that, and then ultimately bring that onto the balance sheet when they look to consolidate at some point down the road. So I would say that that is a large majority of our business, because as much as we may be valuation and consulting professionals, we tend to at least have background or exposure to the accounting and financial reporting side of the house. Or in addition to that, if we don't know how to figure that out, we've obviously got, very deep Rolodex of individuals and professionals that have done that before and can help us out and help our clients through that process.
For sure. And can you talk to me a little bit about what the transition was like for you, going from an auditing role to a more like traditional consulting role internally?
Yeah, so that transition was really pretty interesting, especially at the time when I joined. I would say a bulk of our work was really helping clients figure out and navigate their way through impairment analysis to make sure that they didn't have portfolios or large assets on their books and records, and sitting there on the balance sheet at maybe a value that was above any recoverable amount. And so learning that whole process, which was a first for me, and going through my first wave of, really back-to-back impairment exercises and impairment analysis was interesting. But that's really where I cut my teeth, is trying to look at other analyses that were put together by clients internally and trying to help them figure that out, or by receiving analysis that were done by third-party preparers, or perhaps outside consultants, similar to my own group, that were prepared for the purposes of supporting an audit, and trying to poke holes to that and really make sure that ultimately the estimates that were used for accounting purposes were appropriate and kind of acceptable in the circumstances.
school. And then so when you cut your teeth on that, but then when you transitioned, it's like you went from all this impairment analysis to, obviously to doing more proactive stuff, or was a lot of the real estate stuff also similar?
Yeah, so this was all impairments. Maybe I should have clarified better, but this was all impairment specific to real estate,
Oh, okay.
looking only at real estate assets. If we're
And when
looking,
you were on the audit side, what types of product, how was it different?
so I guess on the audit side, you're really, auditing the balance sheet, you're auditing the P&L, statement of cash flows,
Mm-hmm.
you're auditing the whole company. When I moved on to the real estate side, and we were preparing analysis either used by auditors and tested by auditors, or we were assisting our own internal audit firm um, by reviewing a lot of the work that was thrown their way. And they didn't have kind of the specialization in real estate or the background in real estate to digest, a 10-year DCF and look at various cap rates and discount rates and the various, market leasing assumptions that go into developing maybe an income approach analysis, which is, for the most part, a lot of the key drivers, in value or in valuation, if you kind of set aside the cost and market approach.
And can you tell me a little bit about, so thanks for that. Can you tell me a little bit about just how you thought about your career starting out? I mean, obviously it was like survival initially, right? Which makes a lot of sense. And then as you kind of applied for this real estate consulting role internally, can you tell me about a little bit of like who you had to talk to internally? Was it one of those things where it's like technically goes through HR, but you still need like the blessing of your manager, your senior manager, or it's not going to go well? Or is it a truly like internal request transfer that stays confidential?
Yeah, it's I would still say it's not as easy as it could be.
Mhm.
A lot of times when you look at, the various, accounting entities that may, be under the same umbrella with, real estate consulting or some sort of valuation and transaction consulting group, no one wants to lose good people. But I think when it gets right down to it, you would rather see a good auditor go over to the consulting side rather than walk out the door, period, and go work for another competitor maybe, or go work in industry. So at the end of the day, I think they try to hold back auditors as much as they can, but there does become a breaking point where the auditors just, their heart's not in it. They're just not, they're eventually going to set themselves up for failure if they can't stomach 80-hour work weeks and kind of working through the night on something that they really have disdain for and can't stand doing. So ultimately, I think
Were those 80-hour weeks, was that only in busy season, or was it like year round basically for you?
no, yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely in busy season only for the auditors. I mean,
Mhm. And that's like 3 months or so.
yeah, I would say it depends on your clients, but sometimes it starts kind of in October and goes through November. It might slow down a tick in December, and then you pick back up kind of first week of January, and you'll probably go pretty strong through early April for the most part. Is kind of in my experience, or at least through maybe 331. On the consulting side, it's been a bit different. We tend to stay fairly busy year round. So very infrequently do we have 80-hour work weeks, but very infrequently do we ever see 40, 45, 50-hour work weeks. So
Yeah,
we tend to work in excess of that, but probably, have more stable hours throughout the year.
for sure. And so can you talk specifically when you were trying to make that transition? You said you applied once and they said, well, no, you need to either work more or you need to go get a master's.
Yep.
What was the thought process of just sticking around? Was it more just like, hey, I don't know if I leave with the Great Recession or whatever that was happening then? Was it? And I'm trying to tie it back to today. If there's people in a similar situation of thinking of go back to school right now during COVID, do you think it's better to stick around and get that experience, or do you feel like, hey, if you had just gone to school for a year, got your master's, it would have been a faster? But like looking back at yourself, what would you suggest to kids in a similar boat?
Yeah, I don't think I regret the path that I took. Could I have gone back to school, missed out on a year of salary, paid a decent sum of money to collect, an additional degree? Sure, I could have gone that route. I actually asked the same question to a bunch of the partners throughout the recruiting process. I said, look, this is ultimately what I want to do. What would you suggest? What would you do in my shoes? And frankly, it was pretty unanimous. At least the partners I talked to, they said, if look, if you come out of school with a master's program and you got 0 years of work experience, you have 0 years of work experience. If you come work for the firm and you do well and you've got a year of great work experience operating at a very high level, and now you've earned a salary for a year and hopefully got some sort of, merit increase or increase in base compensation. If I look at those two individuals and compare them side by side and really try to decide on who's worth more money at the end of the day, as far as what is their value that they bring to the firm or to the entity, they would 100 times out of 100 say that it's the individual with a year work experience. So that's kind of the route I went. That was the advice that I got from a number. I would say probably 4 or 5 individuals gave me essentially the same advice. And so I took that and kind of ran with it. Ultimately, no one saw, 7, 8, 9 happening. And so what was supposed to be a year or two and jump ship turned into 3 for me. Still think I was probably, in a lot of respects, pretty fortunate to have found the spot that I did when I did.
Totally.
And,
yeah, it was still a tough time back then. It wasn't like all roses in 2010, right?
No, yeah, that definitely was. It was still tough for a lot of people. I mean, there were still individuals that had been let go a year or so prior, still looking for work. So
right, great, man. Well, you've had a long run there. Any other words of wisdom before we call it? Anything you'd like to share? It's interesting to see kind of your path sticking around with one firm. I feel like nowadays it's much more common to see people coming out and then jumping every year to 3 years from firm to firm to firm. What do you think has been the biggest benefit of sticking around in one place?
it's a great question. I would say the biggest benefit to sticking around is once you make a name for yourself, and hopefully that's a name for yourself in a good way, to constantly jump from firm to firm and recreate that from the ground. And even though, as you continue to get experience in an industry, or, maybe even it's within a demographic area, if you build a name for yourself and you've got something good going, it becomes really hard for you to throw a lot of that away or lose some of that and start from maybe not square one, but, start a good ways back and as far as building up that reputation at a new organization. And so what that's allowed me to do is I've built a reputation, with the current firm that I'm with, and I've been able to just build on that and focus on building on that, not building it back up from the ground. I haven't had to go back to a foundation for many, many years. So, every time I go to a new role or new position within the firm, I start wherever I left off, 12th floor, 15th floor, in the course of kind of building my skyscraper. And so that's one thing that's let me really focus on not trying to make a name for myself. My name's been made already by the past, decade or more of service here at the firm. And so that's really helped me get opportunities that I probably wouldn't have had at other firms, just because I begin to, have a network that is now national and reach out to individuals that I probably would take a good while to figure out who's who across the nation within, the platform that the big four firms operate on. So, although it may seem better to, jump ship for $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000, I think there's definitely some merit to kind of staying where you're at. And, you may not be, compensated what you think you're worth right now, but give it a year or 2 or 5 years. And I think a lot of times you'll find that people will eventually recognize that you are bringing a lot of value to the organization, and that you would leave a hole if you left the organization. And so therefore you may start to get compensated or rewarded. And keep in mind that reward doesn't even have to be in the form of compensation. A lot of times it's exposure, it's opportunities, it's, it could be in the form of, travel and, meeting people and getting exposure that's well beyond anything you can really put dollars on.
Cool. I love it. Anything else you'd share in terms of wisdom of, having been at one place for a long time, or just for the young kids coming out of school now, listening to this, in terms of how they should start their career in this kind of uncertain times?
Yeah, I'd say just be patient. Like, I know everyone wants to, come out of school and make seven figures. And unless you're making seven figures, it feels like you're not making progress. But I think the fact of the matter is you just have to be patient, and that if you work hard enough and kind of stay at it and build a skill set and make yourself valuable to an organization, you'll get there. But it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, no one has been an overnight success. I mean, it may seem that way. You read about people or see them in the news, but you forget that they've been working in their basement for the last 2 decades to finally get to that spot. And then they finally pop, and it's something they've worked for, sometimes an entire lifetime. So just realize that it doesn't happen overnight, and stay patient, stay at it.
Let's leave on that. Stay patient. Thanks, man. I really appreciate your time, Roger.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Patrick.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. Until next time.